2000s team is over. Now to get on to the 2010s guys. However, there was one worth buying from their series.
Those were up, and they did.
We're smart, and my...
He told me enough.
No, I.
Here's Chuck.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and as you all know, we are finally back into the X-Men review series for the team movies. We are 3 down and 4 to go, and we are now on to what came after the first solo film of the series, X-Men Origins, and going straight into our next team of people. And this team of people is going to be for the 2010s team. Yeah, the not as interesting ones. But we are looking to how they started. And they started off pretty good. They started off with one good movie I liked from them. That film is going to be for this time, and this one was not directed by Bryan Singer. It was directed by Matthew Vaughn. This film is going to be for none other than 2011's X-Men First Class. Chronologically, how the X-Men franchise began. And how the beginnings of Professor X and Magneto. So, what's the plot movie? Well, as you all know, this is set before Charles Xavier and Eric Lehnsherr took the names of Professor X and Magneto. They were 2 young men. They discovered their powers for the first time around the 1940s or 1960s, in a way. Like, before they were arch enemies, they were the closest of friends. They worked together with other mutants. There were some familiar, there were some new, to stop the greatest threat the world's ever known. In the process, a rift between them opened, and it began the eternal war between Magneto's Brotherhood and Professor X's X-Men. So yeah, how was this made? Well, producer Lawrence Donner first thought of a prequel during the production in 2002 of X2 X-Men United. Producer Simon Kinberg even suggested 20th Century Fox an adaptation of the comic series X-Men First Class, and the film does not follow the comic though closely. Singer, who had directed X-Men and X-Men 2, was originally involved with the project in 2009, but he would only produce and co-write First Class because of his work on other projects. So Matthew Vaughn, the director of Kick-Ass at the time, and later would direct the Kingsman movies, became the director, and wrote the final script with his writing partners Jane Goldman. Then principal photography and shooting for the movie would begin in August 2010 and concluded December 2010, and additional filming completed in April 2011. The locations were Oxford and Mojave Desert in Georgia, and soundstage work was done at Pinewood Studios and 20th Century Fox stages in Los Angeles. And since this movie is set in the 1960s, the depiction of the 60s drew inspiration from a lot of James Bond movies. So, after X-Men First Class was completed, the movie would go on to be shot and marketed, and after all of that, First Class would finally premiere at the Ziegfeld Theater on May 25th, 2011, and would be released in the United States into theaters to the whole public on June 3rd, 2011. How was it with people? Well, after 2 disappointing films, this would be the first in the series since X-Men United to get good reviews from critics and audiences. They liked this movie for the acting, the screenplay, the direction, the action sequences, the effects, and the musical score, and it was a success at the box office, and it's the 7th highest grossing film in the series. And so, because this movie was a success with people, it repopularized the X-Men again, and more installments would later come out. There was a number of sequels with the new team members, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse, Dark Phoenix, which will be the next 3 reviews. And there will be 4 other solo reviews that will come after I do those 3. As you all know. and they learned from the first attempt at a solo film. Now, as for my reaction to this movie, well, I think most of you know I am not a fan of the 2010s team that much. They don't have any, because you want to know why, guys? Well, for starters, they don't have any of the charisma of the OG team, and they don't have the right portrayals of them at all. But with that being said, their first movie was the one film from them that I think is decently worth buying of the four. So I think this is the best one of the four with this version of the team. So yeah, this one I think is actually I've always liked. It starts off with this crime thriller and a fantasy film, with on Matthew Vaughn's directional list, and definitely Matthew Vaughn definitely found at this time had found his niche genre in the superhero field, even though he had directed 4 films within 7 years at the time this came out. Before this movie came out, the year before this, he directed Kick-Ass in 2010, and that definitely got good acclaim from people, and it did decently good at the box office, and that's actually one of my favorite non-Marvel or non-DC hero movies. And this was back when superhero fatigue was not, the people were not on superhero fatigue. And then after only 2 years, after that, Vaughn would later go on to do X-Men First Class, a Marvel superhero film. And it's an origin story to accompany the whole Singer and Ratner directed trilogy that was released between 2000 and 2006. This film was intelligent, it's thrilling, it's well acted for the most part, it's stylishly directed. Most importantly, it focuses on the relationship between both Professor X and Magneto and how they became frenemies. And it's not just a conventional superhero movie. And where First Class works is in regards to its 2 central characters, which is Charles Xavier, played by James McAvoy, and his rage-filled Eric, played by Michael Fassbender. Their instant on-screen chemistry, it provides the drive and emotion for the plot to carry itself forward, and both characters have different ideologies, and their constant clashes are due to the aspect to allow the script to be brought to life. And instead of just infusing the relationship with forming violent clashes, Vaughn opts for more calculated verbal battles between the characters and regards to their stance with society that they would later become a part of. And Xavier is an electron being who believes humans would eventually be accepted within society as equals alongside humans. I mean, mutants. While unsure, on the other hand, thinks mutants will always be hunted and unable to live peacefully side by side with the human race. And his evidence for this resides in the anti-Semitism and hatred that he gets at the hands of the Nazi Party, and his backstory scene, which we get again with the first X-Men movie. This heavy-set contradiction allows the relationship to be imbued with pessimism here. And they may be shown as friends and fighting together initially, but we all know, since this is a prequel, it's eventually going to turn to a bitter rivalry, and it's a development, and that drives the plot forward. And what really makes First Class work is the great story it has. It tells us the beginning of the mutants, and the friendship between Professor X and Magneto, and they do drift apart, because that's going to happen, and that is kind of predictable, but they will always have respect for each other. During this time, they become close friends, for the time being. And most of the performances in First Class are first rate. You have Kevin Bacon in this, he doesn't get much screen time, but he's a decent enough villain. And his German accent was actually pretty well done, and his opening scene was definitely a pretty good entrance, and he does speak Russian. He also even speaks Russian as well. And Michael Fassbender easily presents the most exciting drama parts of the story right here. You also know he's going to turn evil, but you also hope that he does stick with Professor X at the same time, even though that's not going to happen. And the direction is pretty great. Matthew Vaughn's got this knack of angles and keeps the audience engaged, and the story chops and changes. And the look of the film is modern, and it still has that 60s and retro look about it. The effects are good. It's not quite up there with X2 X-Men United, but it's definitely decently well done. And the energy is fast and relentless, and the action sequences really blend with the dialogue sequences seamlessly. So, how do we start off this film? Well, much like with X-Men 2000, we start off once again in 1944. We all know, a young Eric, before he became Magneto, was bending a metal gate with his mind when he was separated from his parents. So Schmidt brought Eric into his office and tells him to move a coin onto the desk. Eric cannot do it, so Schmidt kills his mother. Then Eric's magnetic power manifests and destroys the room. It's almost like that, but it's told like the scene in the original 2000 movie, but it's done a little differently here. And then, meanwhile, in another place, in Westchester, in a mansion, this child telepath named Charles Xavier meets Raven. And her natural form is his blue skin scales and a shapeshifter, and he invites her to live with him. Then we cut to 1962, and we cut to a now grown-up Eric, and he's tracking Schmidt. Xavier earns his doctorate from the University of Oxford, and in Las Vegas, like, an officer named Maura McTaggart follows U.S. Army Colonel Hendry to the Hellfire Club, and she sees Schmidt, who is now called Sebastian Shaw, who's played by Kevin Bacon, and mutant telepath Emma Frost, played by January Jones. There's this slight clone-producing Riptide and teleporter Azariel. They're threatened by Shaw and teleported to the joint war room, and then like Henry just deploys nuclear missiles to Turkey, and then as Shaw is an energy absorbing mutant, his powers has kept him young, and he later kills Hendry. So yeah, like the filmmakers do state like this movie's a reboot, but there's still fans in here from the old X-Men movies that have an appearance in this movie. Like the problem, that's kind of the problem with this. If you're giving reference to the old X-Men movies to this reboot, it doesn't really make this movie much of a standalone now, does it? References do get made for the laughs, but if this is a prequel, then it's just kind of a jumbled up mess at times. Right there. Like, now, the reference, I will admit, is funny. Is when they see, like, Hugh Jackman makes a cameo as Wolverine here, and they're trying to recruit him, and it's like, fuck off. At the bar scene. Like, the best parts to go to the action, you're like, Matthew Vaughn, at the time of this, knew how to make big and awesome action sequences. Like, the best parts have to go to the scenes of Michael Fassbender. Like, he really steals the show here. Like, he makes Eric and Magneto more dangerous than ever. It's definitely fun and intense to really see him do something menacing here. This is probably one of the first times Michael Fassbender had a menacing role. The rest of the cast is most of the cast is also pretty good. Like, James McAvoy does give a bit of heart to this role. He may not be like Patrick Stewart, and Michael Fassbender may not be no Ian McKellen, but like both McKellen and Stewart, like both of them have good frenemy chemistry here. Like, not as much as like Stewart and McKellen, who I think still the better Professor X and Magneto, but they come a little bit close. And the film doesn't like introduce anything new here because it rotates the concept of fear and hatred of new misunderstood, and it questions what it really means. Like, it sets up the two opposing sides that are going to go on to be represented by X and Magneto, and like, yeah, like you go to how this all started. And you see what makes the characters become who they are. And the pace carries the film well. Especially considering this was like, much like X-Men United, the next one to be actually 2 hours long. And it was good for once to find another X-Men film be 2 hours and give us time to introduce us to the characters instead of rushing the run times like the first film and The Last Stand and X-Men Origins did, and just make it 104 minutes, thinking they could just get it done in that time, which really did not work well at all. So it's nice to actually see it be 2 hours for a change. And I feel like you need to make a film like this 2 hours to actually be able to flesh out the characters if you have a whole team of mutants. X-Men is a whole team, so you need to make their movies 2 hours. You gotta flesh out all the teammates, not just one of them. If you know what I mean. You can't rush all that in a 104-minute long movie. Like, this is about as good as, like, it gets for, like, a comic book reboot around the time this came out. Like X-Men never tended to emulate the moral complexity and darkness of, like, the Batman franchise here. Like, X-Men's not DC, it's not Batman. Like, the series, like, represents a more brighter, colorful world, even if it has a bit of tragedy involved in it, and that tone does kind of continue here. When you have the fights between the X-Men and the Hellfire Club, they're brilliant, and the training is great to watch. Like, First Class does have some great jaw-dropper moments of the franchise. Like, so yeah. After Hendry was killed by Sebastian Shaw, Maura then seeks Xavier's advice on mutation, and then takes him and Raven to the CIA, and they convince Director McCone that mutants exist and Shaw is a threat. Then another CIA officer sponsors the mutants and invites them to this Division X facility. Then Maura and Xavier find Shaw as Eric is attacking him, and Xavier rescues Eric from Giant before Shaw escapes, and that's pretty much how him and Magneto met. So Xavier brings Eric to Division X, and they meet another mutant named Hank McCoy, aka the Beast, who's now played by Nicholas Hoult in these 4 new films. He's a mutant scientist with prehistoric feats. Well, he's the Beast. Then Xavier uses McCoy's mutant locating device and Cerbo to seek and recruit other mutants. Then Xavier and Eric recruit stripper Angel Salvador, Cabby Amando Munoz, Army prisoner Alex Summers, and then drifter Sean Cassidy. Then Xavier, Eric, and Moira leads a CIA mission to the Soviet Union. They capture Frost, and discover Shaw wants to start World War III, and they trigger mutant ascendancy. So then Azazel, Riptide, and Shaw, they attack Division X. They kill everyone but the mutants, and Shaw invites to join him. And Salvador accepts, but when Alex and Munoz retaliate, Shaw kills Munoz. Then we get to Moscow, where Shaw compels the general to have the USSR install missiles in Cuba, and then Shaw's wearing a helmet that blocks telepathy, and he falls the Soviet fleet a submarine so that the missiles could break a US blockade. Meanwhile, we cut back to Professor X and his team. They take their remaining recruits back to his mansion, and they pretty much go back to train and harness their abilities. And meanwhile, Hank McCoy, aka the Beast, because in these 4 movies, he's known to be a bit of a simp for Mystique, which is another reason why I'm not a fan of this Beast either. Because pretty much, throughout these films, as these films progress, he just existed to basically just be a simp for Raven. Just because clearly him and the lady who must not be named were dating at the time they made this. They definitely were dating. They definitely stopped dating eventually, but at the time they were doing this movie, they were definitely dating at the time. So I can bet you Fox just did that because Fox just clearly decided to have Hank McCoy be in love with Raven just for that one reason alone. McCoy, though, believes Raven's DNA can provide a cure for their appearance, and he gets a cure ready, but Raven was persuaded earlier by Eric to not go through with it. She doesn't want to hide her identity, and she refuses to cure. So McCoy uses to cure himself, and it backfires, though. It gives him the blue fur leonine aspects, and that's how he becomes the Beast. Right there. So yeah, if Raven took that cure, it would have backfired on her completely. But yeah, First Class here. First Class is about setting up who these characters are, setting up how they became these mutants they were today. Right here, it puts its characters first. Yeah, not really anything spectacular, surprising, or fresh, but the focus on the characters first was a welcome change here. And it's the quality of the filmmaking that's leagues beyond. That's quality of filmmaking, it's really freshened up ever since 2000 at the time. That shows the filmmaking here really improved. Granted, 1 and 2 were still better than this movie, but still. And it strikes the balance between action and drama. There's one scene where Charles and Eric, that's actually pretty well done, well written. It goes far beyond most other scenes from the films, and the action is pretty fun too. Especially when you have Banshee's combination of flight, supersonic powers. And of course, our non-mutant character, Moria, who's played by Rose Byrne, is definitely the sole human connection in the movie, and believes that there could be something good that comes from the mutant race. You have Sean Cassidy, or Banshee's character, she's a nervous, Sean Cassidy, he's a nervous teenager that's unable to channel his powers, unsure how he could use it to do any good, and Caleb does look and act like the part through his action scenes, though, maybe been a little bit unimpressive. And then you have Alex Summers and Havoc, who's played by Lucas Till, is the volatile one because he has a lack of control over his powers. So not much acting for those guys were required. Here, when Lucas makes sneer comments and looks sneer comments, which he did quite well, though. And you have Amando Munoz in Dharma, played by Eddie Gathegi. He's a short act, and he definitely impressed pretty well in the role. And Kevin Bacon's Sebastian Shaw was a central villain. He's decently fine. The problem is, though, he just doesn't have too many scenes in the movie. But he does pull off the character well with his material he's given, with a good amount of McKelvin manipulation and power, and it definitely stems the whole action of Magneto. He doesn't do monologues, makes some small evil scheme that feels like some escapade. And Emma Frost, who's January Jones's character, who's Shaw's sidekick. Though her scenes, like her character, is the least impressive. I gotta say, she felt the most pointless because she doesn't even come back in the other movies. So there was no point for her character, especially not having her reappear at the end. Either like it was literally just a plank with curves. Maybe there's some fan service for her lingering scenes that can make up for that, but that's the only reason she exists for, is the fan service. For the horny fans. There's just nothing useful to her character. Like Riptide and Azazel, they're just there to be Shaw's henchmen. There's lots mutant action with them, but not much else to say. And that's kind of just a waste of two characters right there. And Riptide doesn't even have a single line in the whole film. And Angel was like the gurgle gone bad mutant that just wants to stop hiding. Right there. And she just wasn't more of her... just wasn't more to her character either. And as far as storylines goes, like, it is a bit of the same old stuff. It's just in a different time period. But this go-around does seem a bit more fresher than the last two entries we got. And it does give a more different take in a broader spectrum than the typical, they're humans, they're mutants, now fight. It delves more into, like, the whole aspect, which is actually always cool. Like, it delves more into how this all began. Like, you see how they all started this whole fight. You know? Right there, it's the origin story of how Professor X started his whole school. And how Magneto started his own evil clan. That's the whole point of the movie. And so after harnessing her abilities, like, you get to the finale here, and now this finale is decently good, but the problem is it's once again a prequel. So this finale is also a little bit predictable. So they go on their mission, they go to the blockade line, and Hank McCoy's piloting. The mutants and Moira, they're taking his jet to the blockade line. Xavier then uses his telepathy to influence a Soviet sailor to destroy a ship that's carrying the missiles. And then Eric uses his magnetic power to lift Shaw's submarine from the water and deposits it on land. Then during the ensuing battle, Eric seizes Shaw's helmet and allows Xavier to immobilize Shaw, and Shaw is now helpless, and Eric reveals that he shares Shaw's exclusive view of the mutants and wants to avenge his mother. And so he finally pushes the Nazi coin he had and carries his childhood through Shaw's brain, and that kills him. Right there. And also, while also not wanting to release Shaw, Xavier wants Eric to stop what he's doing, but now he has to experience Shaw's death. And so now the fleets are now fearful of the mutants, so they both fire at the mutants. Right there. And Eric intercepts it. So Eric's like Magneto, or Eric, yeah, he's called Eric before most of this movie. He turns the arsenal back towards the fleet, and Moira tries to stop Eric by shooting, but he deflects the bullets, though. And unfortunately, one of those bullets ends up hitting Xavier in the spine when he intervenes between the two of them, and that's how he ends up in the iconic chair his character is in. And after realizing this, Eric does rush to help Xavier, and distracted, though, allows the artillery to fall harmlessly into the ocean. And then yeah, like... So, pretty much there, they now have their different views on a relationship between mutants and humans now. Both of them, like... Yeah, both Xavier and Eric have different views on a relationship between mutants and humans, and so Eric then leaves with Salvador, Azazel, Riptide, and Raven. And then, meanwhile, after that, and Raven does have Moira take care of Xavier. Either Moira or Hank. I rewatched this like a few weeks ago, so try to be as fresh as I can. So yeah, because I was busy with trying to get other reviews done and other things done, so I didn't have time to review it straight away. But yeah, Eric then leaves with his brotherhood. He forms his brotherhood, and then we cut to a wheelchair-bound Xavier, now in the iconic wheelchair that we see throughout the movies. We see his character always in. And he still has some of his mutants. They return to the mansion, and he announces that he's going to open up a school, which we all know is Xavier's School for the Gifted. We all know. And Mora promises Xavier that she will never reveal his location, and Xavier makes sure this by wiping up all her memories. And so, yeah, Xavier then pretty much, we all know, gets to work, opens up that school. Yeah, opens up a school for mutants that we all know, like Cyclops or Rogue, Jean Grey, Beast, obviously, and many Iceman, many more would all later go to right there. Those characters you saw in the OG trilogy, they'll go to that school. Eventually, you'll see that all happen as the years progress. And then eventually, like, even though, like, Logan, when they try to recruit Logan in one part, and he told them to fuck off, which was definitely the funniest part of the movie, I will admit it. Right there, like we all know eventually, like, Logan will go to that school. Right there, and like ironically, they do meet him again, his youngest version of him in Days of Future Past. Right there, and they do throw that line back in Days of Future Past. Right there, they still remember that line. Like that was easily the funniest bit of the movie. Right there, like when I saw this in theaters with my scout group on the last day of Scouts. We had a pizza party, Boston Pizza, and then we went and saw this film. The theater was like right next to the Boston Pizza. Like that got the biggest laugh out of the whole theater. Right there. Then, but that movie doesn't end there. We still see Magneto and his Brotherhood, and now having the other Hellfire Club members, they free Frost from her prison, and that was pointless because Frost never came back in the next 3 movies. So what was the point of this? That's how it ends. Like, that's how the movie ends. And it's predictable because you know how it's going to end. Because even though they say it's a reboot, it also feels like somewhat of a prequel movie because they still have things from the 2000s films. Right there. So yeah, the ending was just really predictable. It wasn't really creative. Like, the thing is, with prequel endings, they're always predictable. You know what will happen. And that brings us now to the bad qualities. And guys, there's reasons why I still like X-Men 1 and X2 X-Men United better. For starters, the writing serves as a bit of a problem here. Like, the stories and characters are fine, but there's times when the dialogue has quite the problems. Like, Mystique's line to the Beast was very cliched, and they definitely did not need no dumb romance. I don't like any of the romance in these movies. And, like, Magneto's last line was, like, how he, like, says his name. It was not really stunning. They could have did better with that. That's the way he delivers his final line and announces his name was just not really that creative. Oh, and, now that I mentioned Mystique earlier, this version of her, in my opinion, fucking sucks. I'm sorry to all the Mystique fanboys who will get mad at me for saying that. This is not Mystique, okay? This does not feel like a Mystique at all. Mystique is not supposed to be Professor X's adopted sister, and sure isn't supposed to be his so-called friend either. Yeah. She's like, yeah, she barely even acts like his friend, and she even acts bitchy as hell. And she's just obnoxious, she's snotty, she's whiny, and she just comes off as an annoying brat. And get this, guy, she gets fucking worse in the next 3. They don't make her any more likable. And I don't know why some people actually thought this was such a good version of her, but no, it was not. She's not an anti-hero, for Pete's sakes. She's not supposed to be an ally. That's what these younger generation films don't get. They clearly have never read the character of Mystique at all. Sorry, but the one Mystique that works well is Rebecca Romijn, and it always will be Rebecca, alright? Yeah, not you-know-who I'm not mentioning. And as nice of a villain as Sebastian Shaw was, he just doesn't have much to do either. Especially January Jones didn't. The only reason January Jones was in this was for the horny fanboys. For the fan service. Right there. She just gets nothing to do. So she was a pointless character. And freeing her at the end of the movie was pointless because she doesn't even come back. So why did they even need to free her if they're not even going to bring her back in the next 3? Or any of the other ones. So, could have just left her in jail and still had your Brotherhood. Like, Magneto could have still had his Brotherhood. You did not need to go free her from jail. You clearly seem like you had enough members on your team. You sure do not need any more. And it does get sluggish at times with the pacing. Yes, it's 2 hours long, but get this, guys. X-Men 2, X-Men United was 2 hours long, and the pacing of that movie was done better. That I can say. Right here. These next, the ones after this were all 2 hours, but here's the thing, though. X-Men United was 2 hours, and it got the 2 hours right. Sometimes these next 3 felt sluggish with their pacing. But regardless, though, X-Men First Class, it's still a decently good film. And it's fine enough watch for those that want to see how the X-Men and the Brotherhood became the characters they were today. How Professor X and Magneto became their masters, how they became the frenemies that you all know they are, and how those groups formed, and how the whole school formed. Like how it all started. Some could call this a reboot, or some could mostly call this a prequel, because it's kind of still an origin story of the characters. So in the end, guys, X-Men First Class, it's definitely worth buying for X-Men fans that want to see the origins of Professor X and Magneto, and see the origin of the X-Men in general. Anyways, guys, that's it for my view of X-Men First Class, and if you're wondering how I'm going to rate X-Men First Class, here's how I'm going to rate this movie. So overall, if you are excited for the idea of an origin story of the 2 characters that lead this iconic franchise, and I guess see a 1960s take on the characters, then I would watch and buy X-Men First Class for your collection, no doubt. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank X-Men First Class, I'm going to give X-Men First Class a 7.5 out of 10. There we go, guys. That wraps up my review for X-Men First Class. So, now I'm wondering, what do you guys think of this movie? Now I want to know that. Whether you like this movie, whether you hate this movie. Tell me in the comments below what your thoughts on this whole movie as a whole are. Whether you think it's a disgrace, or whether you think it's a decent little startup, or whether you thought it was a weak way to introduce us to these characters. Tell me down in the comments below. And until then, guys, that will be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. If you like this one to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.